There is a quiet that is not of peace but of depth, a solitude that is not chosen but inhabited. For some, the inner world is not a retreat, it is a primary residence, a landscape of thought so vast and intricate that the outside world can feel like a faint, muffled echo. This is the territory of the deeply introverted. It is often mistaken for shyness, for aloofness, a simple preference for quiet, but beneath the calm surface runs a powerful, unseen current, a current that can pull one away from the shores of simple connection, into the profound and sometimes lonely depths of the self. This is not a story of deficit, but of a different kind of gravity. There is a fatigue that caffeine cannot touch. It is a different category of exhaustion, one that settles not in the muscles but in the conduits of the self. It is the weight of the unspoken, the unsorted, the yet to be processed. This is the first and most constant layer of the quiet struggle, the sheer, unrelenting cognitive load of being. It happens in a room that others would call normal, a cafe, a family gathering, an open plan office. The space is filled with data, a torrent of it. The flicker of a fluorescent light is not just a flicker, it is a rhythmic pulse that demands attention. A conversation 3 tables away is not background noise, it is a narrative to be parsed, its tones and cadences separated and analyzed. The pressure of a companion's expectant gaze carries not just social weight, but the immense task of formulating a response that must be mined from a deep well of internal thought, polished for external consumption, and delivered with the appropriate emotional resonance. This is not social anxiety, though it can be mistaken for it. It is data processing anxiety. The mind is not fearful, it is simply operating at maximum capacity, a supercomputer running a simulation of the world in real time. Every interaction is a transaction that withdraws from a finite internal reserve. A lunch with a close friend, a meeting with a colleague, even a pleasant exchange with a cashier, each requires a conversion of rich, complex inner currency into the simpler coin of public discourse. And after the transaction is complete, the mind does not simply shut off, it enters a state of compulsory review. The conversation is replayed, the phrases examined for hidden meanings, the self is assessed for its performance. Was I present enough? Did my words match my thoughts? Did I give away a piece of myself I cannot get back? This is the echo chamber that follows the social event, a space that is often more draining than the event itself. The body has left the party, but the mind is still there, cleaning up after the guests. This creates a fundamental paradox. The very inner world that provides solace and depth becomes, in the aftermath of social exertion, a prison of overanalysis. Sanctuary becomes a cage with walls of its own making. There is a longing for the simple, unmediated connection that others seem to enjoy so effortlessly, a connection that seems to happen on the surface, but for the deeply introverted, every connection, no matter how small, is a deep-sea dive. It requires preparation, carries risk, and is followed by a necessary period of decompression. The tragedy is that this need for solitude, for the quiet to recalibrate and restore the depleted reserves, is so often misinterpreted. It is seen as withdrawal, as coldness, as a rejection, when in truth it is the most vital act of self-preservation. It is not that they do not love the people in their lives, it is that the mechanism of love requires a silent, empty room to recharge. The burden is the constant management of this energy economy. It is a life of subconscious budgeting, of deciding if the cost of an outing is worth the psychic price tag. It is the feeling of being a custodian of a fragile, intricate, and overwhelmingly rich interior world, a world that is both a gift and a responsibility that never ends. The outside world speaks in a shout, the inner world speaks in a symphony, and sometimes the effort of listening to both at once is enough to make you want to close all the doors and sit in the silence, bearing the unseen weight of your own deepness. This quiet is not a choice, it is a constitution, a fundamental wiring to understand the burden is to look at its blueprint, the very architecture of a mind that defaults to depth. This is not a psychological preference, but a neurological landscape shaped by biology and refined by a lifetime of turning inward. The foundation is often a highly sensitive nervous system, a finely tuned instrument in a world of blunt noise. It is not broken, nor is it faulty. It is simply high resolution. It registers the subtleties that others filter out, the shift in barometric pressure before a storm, the slight tremor in a voice attempting to conceal emotion, the overwhelming intensity of a fabric tag against the skin. This is not being difficult. This is a different way of perceiving. The brain is not ignoring stimuli. It is drinking it in deeply and thoroughly, through 1,000 tiny straws while others sip from a single cup. This constant, high fidelity intake requires a massive internal processing plant. The external world is not the main event, it is the raw data for the real work which happens inside. This internal processing is governed by what science calls the brain's default mode. Network. In most minds, this network activates during rest, during daydreaming, but in the deeply introverted, it is not a mode, it is the headquarters, it is the ever-active background hum of self-referential thought. It connects memories to the present moment, imagines future scenarios, and weaves a continuous, rich narrative of the self. This is the source of the deep reflection, the creativity, the empathy that can intuit another's unspoken state, but it is also the engine of the relentless analysis. The mind is not seeking distraction, it is perpetually, inherently engaged with its own complex tapestry. The switch for this network is not easily flipped, it is the default setting. On position is solitude. This neurological reality shapes the very definition of stimulation. For an extrovert, brain stimulation is often external, a party, a crowd, a constant stream of new interactions that charge its batteries. For the introverted brain, these same environments are not stimulating but draining. They are a power drain. True stimulation, the kind that energizes and fulfills, is internal. It is the connection of two seemingly unrelated ideas. A quiet moment, it is the deep absorption in a book, a project, a line of thought that unfolds without interruption. The brain is not understimulated by the outside world. It is overstimulated by it. The peace it seeks is not the peace of emptiness, but the peace of a different, more complex kind of engagement. The silence is not empty, it is fertile ground. This is the core of the architecture, a system designed for depth, not for speed. It is a library, not a highway. It prefers the rich, associative pathways of internal thought to the rapid, reactive demands of small talk. The mind is not slow, it is thorough. It is not antisocial, it is processing on a different frequency. The origin of this quiet struggle is not a failed attempt to be loud, but a successful, deeply ingrained biological strategy for navigating a world of overwhelming complexity. The burden is not the depth itself, but the constant, exhausting work of translating that depth into a language the outside world can understand, a world that often mistakes the library's silence for a lack of something to say. To live with such an internal architecture is to inhabit a private universe, but one must still conduct business in a public one, and here, in the space between the inner richness and the outer expectation, lies a chasm, a gulf of perpetual misinterpretation where the language of depth is consistently lost in translation. The world speaks the dialect of extroversion. It equates visibility with value and sociability with success. A quiet person in a meeting is not seen as contemplative, but as disengaged. A preference for a quiet evening over a loud party is not respected as a necessary recalibration, but pathologized as a lack of vitality. The need for solitude, which is as essential as air, is viewed with suspicion, a sign of melancholy, arrogance, or some hidden antisocial impulse. The deeply introverted individual becomes a Rorschach test for other people's insecurities and assumptions. They are told they need to come out of their shell, a phrase that fundamentally misunderstands the situation. It is not a shell, it is a foundation. They are not hiding, they are home. This constant misreading forces a choice, a daily performance that is as draining as the social interaction itself. One can remain authentically quiet and endure the labels, aloof, stuck up, shy, fragile, or one can learn to perform a version of sociability, a carefully constructed simulacrum of ease. This performance is a high-wire act. It involves forcing eye contact that feels invasive, manufacturing a stream of small talk that feels meaningless, and holding a facial expression of engagement that is a mask for the internal countdown to solitude. It is a form of psychological cross-dressing, adopting the mannerisms of a culture that is not one's own. The toll is immense. The energy that should be spent on genuine connection is instead diverted to the meticulous upkeep of a facade. It is a tax on the soul for the crime of being different. Over time, this repeated miscommunication builds a wall not of choice, but of resignation, when one's true nature is consistently met with confusion or correction. Protective cynicism can set in. Why try to explain the intricate beauty of a quiet mind to someone who only understands volume? The effort to bridge the chasm begins to feel futile. This is not a misanthropic withdrawal from humanity, but a pragmatic retreat from the exhausting and often fruitless labor of self-justification. It is easier to accept the label of the quiet one than to repeatedly articulate the complex, vibrant reality that the label obscures. The chasm, therefore, widens not from a lack of desire for connection, but from the repeated failure of the connection to land as intended. The deepest cut of this misunderstanding is the erosion of self-trust, when the external world constantly reflects back a distorted image. When you're told your natural state is a problem to be solved, you begin to doubt your own experience. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps this depth is a defect. This sensitivity is a weakness. The quiet confidence of the inner world begins to crack under the weight of external judgment. The very core of one's being, the rich interior life, is cast not as a gift but as a social handicap. This is the true tragedy of the chasm. It can turn a person against themselves, making them see their own deepest nature as the enemy of a happy life. The conflict is no longer just between the self and the world, but within the self, a civil war where the soul's most authentic territory is seen as occupied by a foe. Within this dynamic of burden and misunderstanding, a more intimate conflict takes root. It is a private war waged at the threshold of every door, both literal and metaphorical, a battle between the profound human desire for connection and the visceral systemic cost of achieving it. This is the tyranny of the threshold, the paralyzing calculus that precedes every step into the world. The desire is real and it is deep. The notion that the introverted heart does not long for connection is one of the most persistent and painful myths. It longs for it fiercely. It imagines the ease of shared laughter, the comfort of an understood glance, the profound resonance of a conversation where thoughts and feelings are exchanged, not as simple currency but as intricate valued artifacts. This longing is a quiet, constant ache. It is the dream of a harbor, a place where the deep diving vessel of the self can finally dock and be fully seen without having to explain the nature of the water from which it came. The hunger for this is as fundamental as any human need. But between that hunger and its fulfillment stands the gatekeeper, a nervous system that tallies the cost with unerring, brutal accuracy. The threshold of a social gathering is not a simple doorway, it is a customs checkpoint. The mind presents its inventory. The decibel level, the number of people, the duration of the event, the emotional demands of the individuals inside. A calculation is run in milliseconds, projecting the energy expenditure, the required performance, the necessary recovery time. The result is a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest, a weight in the limbs, a primal pull backward into the safety of the known, controllable interior. This is not a fear of people. It is a dread of depletion. It is the body's intelligent, albeit tyrannical, system of resource management screaming a warning about an impending deficit. This creates a state of perpetual ambivalence, a ghost life of missed opportunities and regretted refusals. One says no to an invitation and is immediately flooded with a dual current, the relief of preserved energy and the sharp sting of loneliness and self reproach. One watches the world move on from a distance through a pane of glass, forged from one's own limitations. Conversely, one forces a yes and often spends the Entire event haunted by a phantom limb of the solitude left behind, the enjoyment. Tainted by the awareness of the debt being incurred, the threshold becomes a site of punishment regardless of the choice made. To cross it is to face exhaustion, to refuse to cross is to face isolation. It is a choice between two different kinds of hunger. The ultimate tyranny is that this conflict reinforces the very isolation it seeks to avoid. Each internal battle at the doorway, each calculated refusal, each strained and difficult. Yes adds another brick to the wall. It teaches the psyche that connection is fraught. That socializing is synonymous with suffering. The world beyond the threshold becomes not a place of potential joy, but a landscape of certain cost. And so, the territory of the self, once a sanctuary, can slowly morph into a fortress. The drawbridge is pulled up not out of arrogance or a lack of love, but from the learned, bone-deep knowledge that every foray into the outside world is a campaign that will leave the inner kingdom weakened, its resources plundered, its sovereign exhausted. The war is not with others, but with the immutable laws of one's own being. There comes a point, however, when the gaze turns inward, not in retreat, but in revelation. The very depth that was the source of the burden begins to reveal its hidden contours, its latent power. This is not a sudden epiphany, but a slow dawning realization that the fortress walls were not just for defense. They were also the walls of a workshop, a studio, a laboratory. The alchemy of solitude is the process of learning to transmute the leaden weight of isolation into the gold of a sovereign self. It begins with a shift in perception, a quiet refusal to see the need for solitude as a flaw any longer. This is an act of profound rebellion against the extroverted ideal. It is the decision to stop apologizing for the empty calendar, for the quiet weekends, for the need to disappear. This reframing is the first and most crucial step in the alchemical process. The solitude is no longer a sentence to be served, but a resource to be managed. It is the fertile, fallow ground in which the seeds of the self can finally germinate without being trampled by the constant foot traffic of the world. In this protected space, a different kind of energy begins to accumulate, not the frantic, spent energy of social performance, but a slow, steady, potent energy of becoming. Within this sanctified quiet, the mind's true talents, once the engines of overanalysis, are repurposed. The deep processing becomes profound understanding. The constant internal narrative becomes a rich source of creativity and insight. The sensitivity to nuance becomes a form of high-definition empathy, an ability to read the subtle, unspoken textures of human emotion that others miss in the noise. What was once liability, the tendency to feel everything too deeply, is re-understood as a capacity. Capacity for connection on a level that is more resonant, more meaningful, precisely because it is not casual. The deep-diving vessel of the self discovers that it was not built to drown in the depths, but to explore them and bring back treasures. This alchemy does not eliminate the need for solitude, it sanctifies it. The quiet is no longer a desperate retreat, but a deliberate return to source. It is the place where the scattered pieces of the self, fragmented by the demands of the external world, are patiently gathered and reassembled. It is where the conversations of the day are digested, not just replayed. It is where the soul, like a plant turning toward the light, turns toward its own inner constellations for nourishment. This is where one discovers that the most important relationship they will ever have is with the quiet, observant, deeply feeling being inside. To make peace with this entity is to build a foundation that no social friction can ever truly erode. The turning point then is the realization that the dark side was only dark because it was unlit by understanding. The depth, the sensitivity, the rich interior world, these are not the problem was the frame through which they were viewed. The alchemy occurs when one stops trying to cure their introversion and starts learning to command it. The solitude becomes a crucible. In its heat, the pain of misunderstanding is transformed into self-knowledge. The exhaustion of performance is transformed into the integrity of authenticity. The deep feeling is transformed from a wound into a Witness, the goal is not to become someone who no longer needs the quiet, but to become someone who wields the quiet as both a shield and a tool for crafting a life of profound and deeply personal meaning. The journey does not end with a triumphant emergence, a final shedding of the quiet skin. It culminates in a more subtle, more sustainable integration. It is the slow, patient development of a personal dialect, a language of one's own that can finally translate the intricate poetry of the inner world into a few, carefully chosen words or actions that the outer world can comprehend. This is not about winning the war between solitude and society, but about negotiating a lasting peace. The first grammar of this new language is the art of the boundary, not a wall, but a gate. A gate that one learns to open and close with conscious intent. This means giving oneself unconditional permission to say no without a cascade of guilt. It means scheduling solitude with the same non-negotiable importance as a business meeting. It means leaving a gathering when the energy account is nearing zero, not when it is catastrophically overdrawn. This is not rudeness, it is stewardship. It is the understanding that to share the wealth of one's inner world, one must first protect the capital. Boundary in this sense is not a rejection of others, but an affirmation of the self. It is the foundational syntax for a sustainable life. The second element is the courage of selective vulnerability. It is the move from performing sociability to offering connection. This requires a brave discernment, identifying the rare individuals who seem to speak the language of depth, who do not mistake quiet for emptiness. With these few, the performance can cease. The mask can be lowered. One can risk explaining, "I need to process that," or "I find large groups draining, but I would love to talk with you one-on-one." This is an immense act of trust. It is offering the complex, unedited manuscript of the self to a carefully chosen editor. These moments, the chasm of misunderstanding is bridged not by the introvert crossing over, but by another soul willing to step to the edge and listen for the subtle, beautiful frequencies being transmitted from the other side. Healing, therefore, is not the eradication of the need for solitude. It is the dissolution of the shame that once surrounded it. It is the quiet confidence that grows from knowing the precise dimensions of one's own energy, the exact rhythm of one's own soul. It is the end of the civil war within. The deep self is no longer seen as the enemy of the social self. They are integrated. The deep self provides the richness, the empathy, the insight. The social self learns to become a graceful and economical ambassador, not a desperate salesperson. There is no longer a struggle to be different. There is a calm commitment to be whole. And so a new kind of calm emerges. It is the calm of a tree that has stopped trying to grow like the grass around it. Its roots drive deep into the nourishing darkness of solitude. Its branches reach out, not to every passing wind, but selectively to the sun and the rain it needs. It provides shelter not through constant, noisy movement, but through its steady, resilient presence. The deeply introverted life once lived in the shadow of a perceived flaw is revealed in its true form, not a half-life, but a different orbit, a slower, wider arc around the sun, gathering more light in its silence, feeling the pull of gravity not as a chain, but as the very force that holds a complex and beautiful universe together. The final piece is the understanding that this depth was never a dark side, it was only ever the other side of the moon, a face that is perpetually turned away from the noisy, brilliant sun, and in that perpetual quiet holds its own mysterious and profound beauty.